is Jill Holbert. I'm Associate Director at the City of Albuquerque Solid Waste Management Department, and I'm also on the MWMA Executive Committee. During this session, we're going to be talking about advanced recycling. But I want to step back a minute. Many of you are from city government, and as you know, plastics and plastics recycling and advanced recycling are smoking hot issues right now, right? I mean, daily you field questions about plastics recycling from a public that doesn't understand. You can't put plastic bags in your recycling cart. You can't bag your recycling in your recycling cart. And also wants to know that if they do put plastics in the recycling cart, that they're truly getting recycled and not just sorted to go to the landfill. So plastics are a hot topic, both in general and industry-specific media. Within the last few weeks alone, plastics featured prominently in articles about a recent recycling partnership webinar, a Greenpeace study, and a gotcha story on TerraCycle, the company that promises to recycle items that others have given up on. Today, we're going to hear about what makes advanced recycling an attractive option for processing plastics, especially what we think of maybe hard to recycle plastics. But we're also going to look at the notion that advanced recycling is even that, recycling. And we're going to hear some important considerations that will help us, we who work at municipal waste, as municipal waste officials, to decide when advanced recycling makes sense for our communities and when there might be a higher and better use for our commodities. We have 5 panelists today. One of them is joining us remotely. So I don't want to spend too much time on introductions, but let us welcome Joshua Baca from the American Chemistry Council, Kurt Artz from ExxonMobil, Bill Cooper from Cyclics, Mark Wilfock he's the Director of Solid Waste Management for the City of Houston, and Kate Bailey with EcoCycle in Boulder. Just a heads up, I told you this is a great topic. It really is. Just a heads up, we're not going to take breaks between panelists. So please hold your questions until the last speaker, who will be Kate, is done. And at that point, we'll focus on any questions you might have. And again, we are doing this virtually as well as here in this space. So please use the microphones when you do ask questions. So Joshua, you're the first one up. Will you head us off?
Hey, Jill, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're at. Thank you so much for taking some time to have me today. The most important question I want to start off with is, Jill, as a native New Mexican, is it red or green? Because that's going to really determine the direction of this conversation. Okay, so the New Mexicans in the audience know what I'm going to say, Christmas. That's a good answer. That's a safe answer, which means both. I'm also from New Mexico. I was born and raised. For those who don't know, there is a small town 62 miles north of Santa Fe called Las Vegas, New Mexico. And that is the original Las Vegas, as we like to say. And so it's good to be speaking with or being with some native New Mexicans today. In fact, my mother still lives there. And so good to be with you. I wanted to take a few minutes today. And first off, thank you for allowing me to participate virtually. In my household, Halloween is a very important holiday for a young child who is eager to go out trick-or-treating later this evening. So thank you for allowing me to participate via a virtual session. My name is Joshua Baca. I lead the plastics division at the American Chemistry Council. We represent some folks who are on your panel, the chemists, the engineers, the scientists, all of the folks who make modern life possible, particularly when it comes to plastic. We represent those interests and recognize that plastics has played a critical role in making modern life possible, but also recognize that we need to do more to address some of the end-of-life issues that come with the use of plastic. And so that's what I'm here to talk about today. I'm actually going to talk to you specifically about what advanced recycling is and what it isn't, the role it plays in a circular economy, and the outstanding work that our member companies are doing to accelerate circularity in the use of plastics. Maybe the first place to start off with is our industry set some pretty ambitious goals a few years back. And the goals really centered around the idea of creating a circular economy for plastics. And for those who don't know what that means, what we're really trying to get at here is an environment where the material that we create can be used again and again and turned into new products. That's really the key goal here. And to achieve that, we set out two sort of sub goals. The first goal is that by 2030, 100% of the plastic packaging we make will be recyclable or recoverable. And the easiest way to think about what that means is that we want to make sure that people have access to recycling, not just so that we can recycle more bottles and milk jugs, but so that all plastics, whether regardless of what type or what their use is, can go in a blue bin and can be recycled. And by 2040, we want to make sure that 100% of that material is actually recycled. Too often today, we hear of stories of plastic material making its way into the blue bin and it actually not getting recycled. And you heard some of the comments today about what the recycling rates are. There's a lot of opinions on what that is, and I'll get into that in a little bit greater detail. And so for us as an industry, the first thing that we did and what we do well at the American Chemistry Council is we are the chief advocate for our industry. We outlined a plan last year that talked about how we can accelerate a circular economy for plastics. What that plan entailed was using more recycled plastic in the packaging we make. We call for a national recycled plastic standard so that all plastic packaging have at least 30% recycled content by 2030. We call for updating our recycling laws to make sure that advanced recycling is recognized as an appropriate tool in the toolbox to recycle more material. And specifically what that means is making sure that we are regulated appropriately, not as waste incinerators, but as manufacturing processes that are working to create new products from the material that we get. There are 9,000 recycling jurisdictions all across the US. We think we need to improve that. And at the end of the day, when we think about the issue of circularity or advanced recycling, if you can't get more material in the blue bin, then there's no reason to try to do any of it. Another alternative way that I like to think about it is that, it's like building a Tiffany store. We could build the best, most beautiful Tiffany store, but if we don't have any diamonds to sell, then what's the point of building it? And on the issue of advanced recycling, the only way it will ultimately succeed at the end of the day is for our ability to get more feedstock, more used plastics into the system that can be turned into new products. We also call for a study to make sure that we understand the impact of GHG across all materials. And then finally, making sure that we establish an American Design Producer Responsibility System that provides the necessary funding to ensure that we improve access, collection, and education to recycling for all materials. Part of that approach is that, big key thing that we advocate for is the work and the progress being made in advanced recycling. And what does that actually really mean? Part of our strategy, as I mentioned earlier, also included a state strategy, and meaning that we want to make sure that there are appropriate regulations in place to help grow, scale, and foster the development of advanced recycling. The key thing here for us is 20 states have enacted laws that recognize advanced recycling as a manufacturing process. And really, just as I said, much like we're asking federally, the simple way to think about this is that we want to make sure that advanced recycling is regulated as a manufacturing process and not a waste incineration process, because we don't incinerate plastics through advanced recycling. Part of the question I always get asked all the time is, why is it advanced recycling and what makes it so advanced? And so I think it is important to sort of start off with that we view advanced recycling complementary in nature to traditional or mechanical recycling processes, but we also recognize that there are limits to mechanical recycling. Most notably is that the idea of creating an infinite loop through mechanical recycling is really difficult. And so when we think about what advanced recycling is, it really is a consortium or a suite of technologies that our companies are using to make sure that more plastics get recycled today. And it really goes to that very first point. Advanced recycling today is going to help 90% of plastics that aren't getting recycled actually get recycled. It's going to transition our industry, which I think is really important, from one that deals with plastic manufacturing in a linear model to one that is much more circular. That really fosters a circular economy and really helps drive down carbon emissions and allows us to achieve that at a lower carbon footprint. To that point, it limits the use of natural resources to make new products. It makes sure that more of the hard to recycle plastics and mixed plastics gets recycled. And might be the most important thing is it creates virgin quality plastic that can go into food, medical, or pharmaceutical packaging that have high performance standards and strict regulations when it comes to the performance of those applications. Part of that is recently, there's a huge debate going around not just what advanced recycling is, but the impact of advanced recycling. And using advanced recycling can not only be a solution to addressing circularity, but also a solution to addressing carbon emission. We worked with the City College of New York, who put out a recent quantitative comparison study of LCAs on the current state of advanced recycling technologies. And they worked with several of our member companies to sort of develop a baseline. And really what it showed here is that we can have a tangible and significant impact on reducing carbon emissions by more than 100% when compared to alternative methods like landfilling or incineration. And it also ensures that we can reduce our use of fossil energy or fossil feedstock, which are all things that will help achieve a lower carbon future that we're all working towards. Part of what we have been doing as an industry and why this is so important is that we have been putting our money where our mouth is. I think you'll hear from Kurt today about some of the work happening at ExxonMobil, but they're not the only company who's doing it. There are a ton of companies in this space right now. Collectively, they have committed over $7 billion in private sector investments. And I think that's really important. I want to underscore that point. Private sector investments to help scale and grow advanced recycling that has the ability to divert more than 18 billion pounds of used plastic from our landfill. That's pretty significant. And so to this point, I think a really important point, I took some great exception with the agenda in a good way, because I actually look really forward to talking about this idea about what advanced recycling is. Is it just a means to create fuels? All things that we deal with on a daily basis. And so I also believe in transparency. And so about 5 to 7 years ago, when the idea of these technologies came to market and trying to use plastic to create new products, yes, there was a heavy emphasis on creating fuels. There were partnerships with some of our member companies like Agilix and Virgin Airlines and Delta Airlines to use plastic to try to create a low sulfur diesel fuel or some other form of transportation fuel. That's where the world was 5 years ago, maybe even further than that. The world has evolved very significantly today, both because technology evolved and because the world has changed. And so when you look at what the world has changed, you have several hundred consumer brand companies and retailers who have made a commitment to use more recycled material in their packaging by a date certain. Even the US Plastic Pact has some ambitious requirements to do so. We as an industry have ambitious requirements to do so. We have our circularity goals around 2030 and 2040. We have a committed policy-wise to using more recycled material, a 30% standard by 2030. And so advanced recycling has evolved today into one that was focused on creating fuels to one that is really in the business of creating new products, new plastic, a feedstock that can create new plastics that make a variety of things that we need today. That is critical, as I mentioned, particularly on the food, pharmaceutical, and medical approaches here. The other thing that I think is important about this, and I'm certain some panelists will get into this in a little bit greater detail. I think it's really important to remember that the use of advanced recycling, part of what we advocate for very aggressively, is also independent certification to ensure that recycled material is going into the products that we are creating. That's really critical. Entities like ISCC Plus certify this approach with several of our member companies. It allows us to ensure that both retailers and brands have that confidence at the end to market their products. And it also gives us gives consumers the validation that they need that the product actually contains recycled material. Part of that approach, which I think is really critical, is can advanced recycling create a fuel? Yes, it could definitely create a byproduct that doesn't go into create new plastic. But to be very clear, that does not count as recycling. And that has long been the position of the American Chemistry Council when it comes to this issue. The final couple of things that I would say is, I kind of touched on this a little bit, but the whole system, the whole recycling system is in need of some massive change here. And I think we on this panel and in the discussions we have really need to think outside the box on how we continue to innovate. We estimate here from McKinsey shows that we need about, or there's an estimated value about $2 to $4 billion in recovering used plastic because it's valuable. And you'll hear from our panel or some of our panelists today, that could be a valuable feedstock to create new products as well too. And so that's huge and critical to what we're doing. To show that, I'd like to show this slide here, which I think is really important. it just shows some of what these commitments mean for us. Shell, one of our member companies, has committed to using 1 million metric tons of recycled plastics annually by 2025. Let me emphasize that 2025 is just a few years away. We have partnerships with Agilix and Amsty who are looking ways to address advanced recycling. We have Cyclix and ExxonMobil, who I'm certain we'll talk about their partnership. Chevron Phillips is working with Braven and Nexus. Eastman is bringing products to the market with Herbal Essence and Stanley Black & Decker. Sabic is working with Philadelphia cream cheese tubs and Magnum ice cream tubs. Berry and LyondellBasell just announced a partnership with Wendy's to use more recycled content from advanced recycling in their cups that they use at their retail facilities. These are all fantastic examples. There are over 50 products on the global marketplace that use advanced recycling or material from advanced recycling to make the products that they want. That is real. And so the thing that I would say for you is I would highly encourage you to visit our website, plasticmakers.org. And I think this headline really combines what we're doing really well. Our job in advocating alongside our member companies is to make sure that we take the combination of innovation that they are leading with and bring in that angle of sustainability so that we could have a lower carbon future and a circular economy for plastics. And so I would highly encourage you to visit the website. I'm certain that there will be an opportunity to take some questions as well too. But that's a quick presentation of what I have, and happy to take any questions or comments.
We're going to hold off on questions until all of the speakers. So if you can just stand by, and Bert is next.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak about driving circularity through advanced recycling. Let's first start off with the fact that plastics and plastic products actually bring a lot of benefits to society. Maybe not often recognized, but clearly the concerns around the end of life have to be addressed. Plastic waste should not end up in the environment. And it's actually part of a larger inadequacy of waste collection and infrastructure management around the globe. In developing countries, about 3 billion people lack access to controlled waste management and disposal facilities, which actually impacts all materials. And then here in the developed world, we obviously talk a lot about increasing circularity and transforming waste into higher value products, which is a shared objective. So as Joshua already mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about advanced recycling, which we view as complementary to mechanical recycling, in the sense that it can handle a broader range of mixed plastic waste, and it also produces resins and products that are equivalent in quality to virgin materials today. So is advanced recycling a myth or a miracle? Well, as a chemical engineer, I think it's neither of the above. But I do believe it is a real and scalable solution that can really enhance circularity and that is grounded in science. So while I want to talk a little bit about the actions that ExxonMobil is taking to drive circularity, I'll focus on advanced recycling, but I do want to mention that we're also aiding product design, because clearly that's another element of this solution set that will be needed. And through our high performance resins, we allow the value chain to use less material and to enhance recyclability of the packages that they make. So what is ExxonMobil doing when it comes to advanced recycling? Baytown, Texas is our site of our hub today, I would say, of our advanced recycling technology, where we have recycled about 15 million pounds of waste over the last 12 months. And we're in the final phases of expanding that capability to 66 million pounds by the end of this year, which will make it one of the largest advanced recycling facilities in North America. We've also announced plans for 1 billion pound of advanced recycling capability globally by the end of 2026 through leveraging our large integrated sites in the US Gulf Coast, Canada, Europe, and Singapore. And so that's a big step up versus the 15 million pounds we've processed to date. But again, I think it marks the milestone and the first milestone into a larger and future ambition. So it is real. Now, how are we integrating advanced recycling into our existing processes? And at ExxonMobil, we use essentially two technologies, which are shown in the green on this slide. The first one is our proprietary Extend advanced recycling technology, where plastic waste is essentially fed directly into our existing facilities. That require some small modifications. And as we leverage those existing facilities, that approach has advantages in terms of speed to market and scale, as well as results in a lower carbon footprint on a feedstock basis versus the conventional fossil-based feeds. The other approach is a more typical industry approach, maybe, which is a two-step approach where plastic waste is fed into typically third-party standalone pyrolysis units, which produce a liquid pie oil that then gets co-fed into our existing facilities. And so plastic waste is always one of the feedstocks that we use in our facilities. And through advanced recycling, it's broken down to its molecular level and then turned into raw materials that can be used for a variety of valuable products, including virgin quality resins. Now, as these raw materials are indistinguishable, whether they're produced from a conventional fossil-based feed or whether they're produced from a waste feed, the industry relies on third-party, auditable, mass balance verifications mechanisms, such as ISCC+, to really tie the amount of plastic waste that we recycle as an input to the output of circular certified resins that we sell to the marketplace. And that approach is very commonly used in many other industries. For example, renewable power distribution, where power companies sell green electricity or renewable energy to their customers, but the electrons that actually end up in your house may not be from a renewable source because the kilowatts are completely fungible and the grid is not segregated between fossil and renewable sources. And so that's really the attractive thing about this thing, but key enablers are needed. And key enablers are needed for us, for ExxonMobil, and for the whole value chain to maximize the impact of advanced recycling. And those require collaborations with many stakeholders across the value chain. The first one is access to quality waste feed at scale. And that may seem a little bit contradictory as there is a lot of garbage out there, but actually access to plastic waste feed at scale is still a bottleneck. And secondly, it's the recognition in policy of advanced recycling and mass balance attribution, such as ISCC+, to be recognized as recycled content. And so what is ExxonMobil doing in terms of collaborations and working across the value chain to really help to address these critical enabling conditions? Maybe just a few examples are shown on this slide, but in terms of access to quality waste feed, we work with organizations such as the Alliance to End Plastic Waste and also Cyclics, which I'm sure Bill will talk more about, which we view as playing a key role in the missing link in the supply chain between the plastic bale that goes from a MRF to a landfill and the minimum quality of waste that we need as petrochemical feedstock. And when it comes to recognizing advanced recycling and mass balance attribution, we work with our industry partners and with ACC to advocate with policymakers at the state and the federal level. We work with our customers and the brand owners to really meet their demand for circular certified resins. And we work with partnership with municipalities such as the City of Houston to help them meet their sustainability goals. And again, this slide shows us a little bit of the concept of that partnership on the City of Houston, and I'm sure Bill or Mark will talk more about that. I just wanted to highlight that it's a first of its kind, 5-party collaboration where actually each of the parties brings their own expertise and scale with a joint objective to increase the recycling rate of plastics in Houston. And so that's really exciting. And so in summary, what I would like to leave you with is maybe 3 things. First of all, plastics and plastic products do bring a lot of benefits to society and enable our modern way of living, but the end-of-life concerns need to be addressed. We view advanced recycling as one of the key solutions to really establish a circular economy for plastics. But again, it's a pretty nascent space, and it requires collaboration, sustained collaboration and innovation with many stakeholders in the value chain to make that a reality. Thank you.
Kurt, thank you, Bill. I'll start while the slides get figured out. Think about what's going on in the world today. You go back to Calvin Coolidge, the chief business of America. That the chief business of America is business. Milton Friedman went on further to say that the business of business is business. There's a changing ethos now, and I think that's why we're all here. And it's why you're seeing consumer pressure, you're seeing municipal pressure, and you're seeing commitments emerging from the private sector, from the actions of ExxonMobil, their peers in the petrochemical space, from the brands, from the converters, from the recyclers, thinking about, as it relates to plastic, doing it differently, thinking about putting more of a focus on taking responsibility for what we do as a community, taking that focus and changing the way we behave, changing our behavior to create new solutions for plastics. Next slide, please. So as we think about changing plastic recycling, and we think about changing plastic recycling at scale, we do have plastic recycling infrastructure, and that plastic recycling infrastructure has been created, it has evolved to deal with what's able to be recycled today on the plastic side. And there we go. When we try to think about how to change the way plastic is recycled at scale, we have a number of challenges. Plastic is complex. The plastic recycling today tends to deal with a single type of plastic, a drink bottle, a PET drink bottle, or HDPE jug, and those are separated from the waste stream. They're cleaned, they're washed, they're prepared, they're reformed into a pellet, and they can go back into new products. However, if you look at expanding what can be recycled to all plastic, and Joshua mentioned this focus on all plastics, you run into a huge number of different combinations of chemistries. How to deal with that is a problem. Then you add on top of that the number of different types of plastic there are out there, the different products, and that initial chemical complexity is compounded by the diversity of plastics that are out there. Then you have the use-related contamination. In that, you don't have a supply chain that's set up currently to aggregate all that plastic, because the supply chain that has been developed is a supply chain that was built to recycle what could be recyclable. The bottles, the jugs, those types of things. Even if you were to aggregate that, you don't have the adequate infrastructure to process it. Once you start taking all plastics, you not only do you have the rigid plastics, but you have the films and you have the foams. All of this compounds itself with a new challenge of not just qualifying things for mechanical recycling, but also qualifying materials for advanced recycling, which looks at materials differently, not from a plastic type, but from a chemical profile. If I have all of this plastic soup together, what does it look like from a chemical profile? How does a chemical company look at that and understand what it means for their processes, what the chemical profile it is, and how they can focus on that? And that's where Cyclyx is focused. Cyclyx is focused in new and effective ways to aggregate plastic, focusing on all plastic, although we have a number of initiatives for specific circular pathways and take-back programs as well. And then building out the infrastructure and the supply chains to move that plastic, qualify that plastic for downstream processes, both mechanical as well as advanced. So what is Cyclyx? Cyclyx is not an advanced recycler. We are not a mechanical recycler. but we're a post-use plastic company that's creating innovations and innovative new approaches to aggregating material, interacting with consumers, and to qualifying that material for various pathways, both mechanical as well as advanced. Our business falls into two sections. Our 10 to 90 focus is focused on community and it's focused on aggregation. And this is where we're doing a lot of work with the city of Houston. How do we interact with consumers? How do we educate them? How do we focus on creating changes in behavior? So as the mayor mentioned, what's difficult for our generation is easy for the next. How do we educate them? How do we create simplicity so participating in plastic recycling is not a challenge? And our focus there is all plastic. If your residents can take all plastic and put it in a bag and either drop it off or have it included in the curbside recycling, then the thought process of does this get recycled, does it not get recycled? The skepticism that what you're putting in there will actually be recycled. All of that decision process, not skepticism, gets shifted downstream to new infrastructure, which is the second half of Cyclics, understanding what the chemical profile of these streams is and building out the infrastructure to handle the sortation of films, foams, in addition to what's being done today with rigids. Type here is a little small, I apologize. Our take-back programs are 10 to 90 initiatives focused on increasing the recyclability of plastics and the recycling rate of plastics from 10 to 90. It's focused in a number of different areas. One is residential. How do we interface with the residences? Make it easy for them to have a place to drop plastic off, but also work with them to integrate those solutions into the curbside bin. Working with schools, educating that younger generation. Reaching out into the community from those schools so they can bring back plastic from home, use the school location for community take-back programs that we can tie into fundraisers for those schools. Working with corporations, both to take back the plastic that they're using internally, but also to interface with their employees so they can bring back that plastic, all with a consistent message of all plastics. Also work with retail, that interface between consumers and products, consumers and brands. Aggregating that plastic, working with commercial industrial take back as well. And then bringing it to new Cyclics designed facilities that we call Cyclics circularity centers. And the first one was recently announced in the greater Houston area, being funded by ExxonMobil and LyondellBasell, which will produce 150 KTA of recycling feedstocks, both mechanical as well as advanced, because we feel that once you simplify participation and you take all plastics, not only will you end up with the plastics that are going to the landfill now that are difficult to recycle and don't have a home in recyclability, but you'll also get more of the mechanical recycling feedstocks. Those feedstocks will go into mechanical and the balance will be manipulated and processed to get some elements of concern out and then provided to our downstream customers who are interested in advanced recycling. We're also looking at community engagement through an app with a rewards program on the back end supported by Virgin Red. Virgin Red is a rewards program. It's not just for the Virgin Group companies, the cruises and the airline tickets, but they also provide back-end rewards programs for companies like Macy's and Nike's and Home Depot, and Capital One credit card is also a rewards program with Virgin Red. Tie into that so we can run incentive programs with fungible points. People are divided into three groups. There's a group that wants to recycle because it's the right thing to do. There's a group that will recycle if it's convenient to do. And there's a group that incentives really help drive participation. We want to reach all of those groups so we can change the narrative around plastic recycling and increase at scale the amount of plastic that can be recycled, creating infinite loops for plastics. As Kurt mentioned, going back to virgin, plastic can go back to virgin over and over and over again. Through mechanical, you do run into some challenges with material degradation if you recycle it multiple times. So advanced recycling also supports mechanical recycling, that it resets that polymer so it can be recycled over and over again. So we are a membership organization. A lot of the major petrochem players are here. We're expanding down the value chain of plastics because we truly believe that in order to affect change in plastic recycling, it takes participation of the whole value chain. It's not the responsibility purely of the resin producers, but we need the participation of the manufacturers who are making the packaging. We need participation of the brand who's putting the plastic into the market, the consumer who's consuming that plastic. Make it so everything is easy. Have everyone work together. Support that 10 to 90 mission. Work with the municipalities. Work with the communities, the schools, the corporations, and change the paradigm of plastic recycling. And that's really where Cyclex is focused. Thank you very much for your time and look forward to your questions afterwards.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Wolfalk, and just November 4th will be a year that I would have had the privilege to serve as the director for the City of Houston's Solid Waste Department. So really just want to speak to you today about my perspective or my experience in the City of Houston's experience with advanced recycling and you know, the potentials and what it could potentially do for our program as far as I guess making our program a little bit more solvent and a little bit more effective at waste diversion from the City of Houston. When I came to Houston, I'd not heard too much about advanced recycling. And, you know, I want to thank Mike Carlton, our consultant, and that actually kind of opened my mind to the concept of advanced recycling. Because as an old school pioneer in solid waste management, I've been in it for 30 plus years. Some of the items that they were talking about recycling, to me, you know, you just don't do it, right? A lot of you all out there probably like me, traditionalists. You know, we stick with the bottles, papers, cans, plastics, 1 through 7, and that's it. You know, if you have anything else outside of that, we either don't take it, or maybe you can take it to your grocery store. Or just put it in the trash can and send it to the landfill or waste energy plant. So when the concept was first introduced to me, I'm like, okay, here we go. Here's another one of these 3 to 5 year gigs, you know, black box theories that is going to pop up out there, right? I call them black box theories because oftentimes in this industry, you'll come up with, you know, somebody will sit in their loft and they'll think of this great idea and they'll say, hey, send me all your feedstock. And you ask about the program and how it operates and say, yeah, you know, we just put it in here and then poof, it's gone, you know. It's like, okay, yeah. And then, you know, you're so enamored by it and so excited. You sign on to the deal, you start delivering the feedstock, and then one day your truck shows up to the facility and it's completely dark, right? And they couldn't make it. So I've had that experience enough times. So I'm like, here we go, you know, not really interested in hearing about it. But I said coming to Houston, I wanted to open up my mind a little bit, you know, and just start looking at some things differently. And after I started doing the research, you know, through it, and then spend some more time with Exxon, see Michelle out in the audience, I'm like, wow, this really does have some potential. And then looking at the City of Houston's program with some of the opportunities that exist. And by opportunities, I mean, we're City of Houston, we're the 4th largest city, but as far as solid waste management goes, we got some opportunities for improvement. And a lot of those opportunities rest right in our recycling program. And just to help you put it in perspective for you, for this audience, we have about 670 plus square miles that we're responsible for, roughly 390 some odd thousand households, 400 if you include the areas that we actually contract out. But we only have 39 recycling routes that we run throughout the city. So if you do the math on that, you keep everything in perspective, you see that we have some opportunities for improvement to help right-size the program. And in right-sizing that program, we recognize the fact that there may be some items out there that we can recycle that we're not capturing because our service levels aren't up to where they should be. Well, I believe that advanced recycling will help us get there as well. The other thing that we're seeing as far as because we're kind of underfunded in that area and we have those opportunities for improvement is that our contamination rate is pretty high. You know, in some areas of the city, it may be 25% or less. Other areas of the city, it could be 39%. So we're currently kind of debating right now with our recycling process or where, you know, where that sweet spot is. But nonetheless, whether it's 25 or 39, those are all opportunities to improve our recycling program. And when I show up to that MRF, to FCC's MRF, and I look at the content and materials that are coming in there, large part of it, plastic bags. You know, people think that they can just put all of their recyclable items in a bag and just throw it in the container and then that's it. Well, that's really not part of our collection program. So, you know, as I become more familiar with advanced recycling, we're seeing tremendous opportunities to help curb that waste stream or help improve our recycling system and the materials that we recycle. We think it's also going to offer a better or more outlets to the folks who really have a need to recycle plastic films, hard to recycle plastics, as well as some of our schools. We're partnering with Harris County School Board or School District right now in order to step up our recycling efforts and kind of work collectively. So the other advantage that we're seeing right now with addressing some of the plastics is it'll give us a chance to kind of improve the litter and that we see in our waterways that are collecting as well. So we're really looking forward to the opportunities that are out there. We have some pilot programs that we are about to actually implement within the next couple of weeks, I believe sometime during the month of December. And basically what that includes is we have an aggressive area in the city of Houston called Kingwood, the Kingwood area, which is in the extreme northwest portion of the city. And this particular area does not have curbside recycling. They merely have a drop-off location that all residents can take their recyclable items to. And I know you've heard of that before and, you know, you have a drop-off, but when you see this drop-off location in action, it looks like the busiest flea market that you've ever seen in the world, right? I mean, people will pull up, they'll pop their trunks. You will see hundreds of people just visit that location throughout the weekend. And I can guarantee you right now, if we discontinued that program, this 6'2" tall brother would have to find another job, you know? So they've agreed to kind of help us pilot the concept of advanced recycling. So we're looking forward to working with Cyclex, ExxonMobil, LyondellBasell, with really championing this program and getting it off. And how involved are we with it? We're already dedicating our resources. We're dedicating our employees as well as equipment to actually haul material, collect and haul material and deliver it to its processing place. So that pretty much completes my presentation. I just wanted to share my experience and maybe where we're going with advanced recycling, and hope that many of you all would consider as well. Thank you.
Ooh, fifth speaker on the panel. Thank you all for hanging with me, right? We're almost there. And thank you for having me. My name's Kate Bailey. I'm the policies director at EcoCycle. And thanks for the opportunity to share a different perspective on chemical recycling and what is the role it has to play. And that perspective is from a recycling operator. So EcoCycle has been in the business of recycling for 46 years. We started one of the first 20 curbside recycling programs in the country. And we've been in the business ever since. We run a single stream MRF. We run a fleet of collection trucks for recycling and composting. We run a hard to recycle center, which accepts 25 different types of materials. Think electronics, think textiles, think all that stuff that piles up in your closet. And you're like, what do I do with that thing? That's hard to recycle center. So looking to innovate new opportunities in that space. And underwriting it all, we have a really strong focus on education, policy, and engagement, resulting in some of the cleanest recyclables in the country. So we are absolutely coming to this question of chemical recycling from the perspective of an operator, from the perspective of an on-the-ground problem solver, trying to figure out what do we do with these materials that we manage every day. And we also work in conjunction with several other nonprofit and independent recyclers across the country to grapple with this question of where do we need investments in policies to drive new solutions in recycling and in plastics. So with that, we are actively receiving solicitations from chemical recyclers, right? People are asking for our loads, either for pilot plants or startup facilities. So we've had numerous requests over the past year, 18 months. And so really right now in the decision-making process of when and if do we send our loads for chemical recycling. And so I wanted to share some of that decision-making process with you all to help guide your decision-making as well. So I wanted to set a couple foundational principles as we move forward. One, I'm not anti-plastic, right? And I know you all hear from a lot of NGOs who think we're somehow miraculously going to make plastic disappear. That's not my perspective. And I'm not anti-technology either. We certainly have our work cut out for us to improve plastics recycling. It absolutely does play a role, and we absolutely need new technology to do that. We know what works in recycling and we know what doesn't work in recycling as well. So we need to look at new innovation. But I think all of us will agree there is too much plastic in our environment and in our bodies as well as we move forward. So with that, we've come up with 5 tenets on how to assess molecular recycling technologies. And I'm going to walk through each of these as part of our decision-making process to help guide the discussion moving forward. The first thing is really being clear on what is recycling and what is not. The umbrella term of chemical recycling, advanced recycling has included a lot of plastics to fuel technologies in the past. There's still a lot of confusion around when and if these technologies are part of this larger umbrella. So moving forward, I'm going to use the term molecular recycling, and that is going to refer only to technologies that make plastics into plastics. Technologies that make plastics into fuel are not considered recycling from ISO standards, from EPA, from EU Environmental Commission, and a number of other organizations. So everything I'm going to say is going to be focused on just the subset of making plastics back into new plastics products. So that's kind of our first line in the sand, is we do not support anything that's going plastics to fuel. Second thing is we've all paid a price for this messaging about collecting all plastics. Remember, China was collecting all plastics. And what do we know was happening over there? It was pretty egregious. So we have paid the price in terms of rising contamination rates. We have seen rising recycling costs, and you all are getting the phone calls about what is happening to my plastics. That's the polite way to ask the question, right? The public is upset. They don't trust what's happening with recycling, particularly around plastics. And they're no longer believing this mantra of plastics are all recyclable. Just collect them all, we'll sort them out. They are demanding a lot more transparency, and those demands are falling on you as the public sector, as their provider. So we need to be really careful with this messaging moving forward. When we sell our bales to mechanical recyclers, we are selling a very specific bale. It has industry listed specifications around what's in that bale of PET. It contains this much PET. It does not contain these plastics. It is only allowed these contaminants. We need that level of detail and specifications for molecular recycling as well. In fact, I would argue what we need is a diagram, right? For the engineers in the room, we need a material flow diagram. We need to know exactly what feedstock you're collecting, how it's being collected, what is the technology that's being used, what is the output, meaning what is the product or packaging it's being made into, and how are you managing your hazardous waste? And this last part in particular, the hazardous waste, is because advanced recycling, molecular recycling, is different than mechanical recycling. It produces hazardous waste and it produces hazardous air pollutants, things that do not happen with mechanical recyclers for the most part. So we need full transparency in material flow. So we need to, so you can answer your public specifically about what is happening to the materials and really understand what's being proposed. We also need a lot more clarity on the environmental and the social impacts. We're talking about high heat technologies running at 500 degrees Celsius, again, producing hazardous waste and hazardous air pollutants. And the life cycle analysis on this has mixed results. So the closed loop analysis showed some of these technologies might be better for climate, some of them may not. It really depended on the technology and the feedstock. So we're going to need a lot more details about the environmental analysis and also talk about being on the hot seat. These projects are extremely controversial. They are a big point of controversy with the NGO community. So as you consider them, be prepared for a lot of public pushback on these technologies in particular. There's also a lot of questions about the economics. I know a lot of you have been down the rocky road of plastics recycling. At the beginning of the summer, we were getting 40 cents a pound for our PET. At the end of the summer, we were getting 4 cents. It's pretty hard to make that work out there. And while we need new technology, the technology itself is not solving for bad economics. So we really need to ask a lot of questions around the economics. We've heard earlier about private investment. There's also a call for public investment. Brightmark was asking for $50 million in public bonds to underwrite their Georgia facility, which eventually failed to prove that it can work. So they are looking for public money as well. There's a lot of questions about how much brands are really willing to pay for the recycled plastic that molecular recycling could potentially produce. And just to give you a little insight, I've had some conversations with chemical recyclers who have asked me as a MRF, how much am I going to pay them for them to take my plastics? I'm like, oh no, folks, that's not how it works, right? You have real costs as MRFs and as solid waste operators. You need to get paid for your materials. And underwriting all of this, of course, we need third-party certification. We need to know where these materials are going. Recycling really suffers from a lack of transparency, and that is something that we are really going to change in the next 5 or 10 years. So let's bring this home. Plastics are a problem, but they're here to stay. We need new technologies. But molecular recycling is posing some challenges around the economics, the environmental concerns, what exactly is happening with these processes. So is there opportunity for innovation? Where might that innovation be a good fit? To me, there's a couple options where these technologies could be a potential fit. 2 big portions of your waste stream are carpet and textiles. So I'm talking about polyester, right? How do we get this polyester shirt back into PET bottles and create a circular supply chain for PET? Carpet and textiles can have very specific collection systems. There's need for new technology in these spaces. Mechanical recycling cannot deal with the complexity of carpet and clothing. So this is a potential opportunity for these technologies. Post-industrial materials, things that actually never even come through your city systems, things that are the byproducts of manufacturing, are also a potential solution. They need clean, consistent feedstocks are needed to scale these new technologies, and that's a great place to look for them. So these are viable opportunities as we move forward with innovation. This mixed plastic packaging is not. So 3 years ago, the poster child of chemical recycling was this plant in Utah, Renewlogy. They were, as Mark mentioned, the black box that was just going to make everything go away. And to their worst nightmare, it closed more than a year ago. Shuttered, has not come back online since, is not looking to come back online. They were taking mixed plastics, kind of a dump everything you got in the plastic bag through the hefty energy bag program. We'll turn it into diesel fuel. And this is where we are 3 years later. So we've got a long history of these technologies moving forward. So this is where we do not see this as a solution for plastics packaging. And just to wrap up in perspective, we've got a lot of challenges to solve with plastics. Recycling is 100% part of that solution, but is not 100% the solution. There's a role to scale up mechanical recycling. There's a role for molecular recycling, particularly with hard to recycle. And there's a lot of innovation in new packaging design, material substitution, reuse. So think about, you've got a broad set of tools in the toolbox as you move forward, and look forward to questions about what's next for your role as municipalities in this problem solving. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kate. And now I'd like to turn to the audience for question and answer. If you're in the room and you have a question, walk up to a microphone. Juby's going to show us where the microphones are. Oh, I'm going to hand them to you. Okay, so if you're in the audience here, you need to use the microphone. If you're at home and joining us over Zoom, we're also recording the session. So you just need to, I guess, go to the Q&A function, go into the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll ask as many of those as we can as well. Do we want to start, anybody to start us off? Go ahead.
So Manuel Medrano, Environmental Services Manager for the City of Chula Vista. I share Kate's sentiment and wanted to ask Mr. Vaca, joining us virtually or remotely, what's the likelihood of having some standardization for this industry? We heard great points from Kate about making sure that it's not turned into, the materials not turned into fuel, and that we need a lot more clarity in that product line. So what's the likelihood of us actually having a national standard also with environmental impacts? I know I understand there's a EU guideline that also dictates how those facilities are managed in the European Union. So is there something like that coming to this country that we could trust and we could look for?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And you know, kudos to you on all the work you do in local communities. That work is often underappreciated and is core to what we're trying to do. I'm going to try to address your question and also maybe address a few comments that Kate made. I'm struck by the comment that Kate made where she said she's not anti-plastics, but she might be pro-fear-mongering here. And I mean that in the sense that so much of the presentation that she put forward today is really based upon the past, not really the future. And so she uses the example of Renewology, and I'm always drawn to the same comparison. Renewology was clearly not a success, but for folks who live in California, one of the best entrepreneurs of our generation was a guy named Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs invented a thing called the Newton. And the Newton was a massive failure on every way, shape, or form. But what many people don't know about the Newton is that without that failure of the Newton, there would have been no iPod. And without the iPod, there would be no iPhone. And without the iPhone, there would be no iPad. Without no iPad, there would be no modern operating systems in our MacBooks that were manufactured today. And so I think the first thing that I would say is in regards to standardization, that's really the centerpiece of my slide that I put forth about our 5 actions for sustainable change. In there are very clear details on the need for standardization, for recognition of mass balance, for clear definitions around what these things mean. And so I would encourage you and Kate and every one of your panels to join alongside us and help advocate for getting that through, because I think it would be really important. The other thing that I think I would also just highlight really quickly is, you know, for particularly folks in the room, and I can't see everybody, so I apologize. These things are not controversial. And when I say these things, advanced recycling is not controversial at all. There's nothing controversial about it in the context of, I would encourage any one of you in the room or any of the panelists visit one of our advanced recycling facilities. There was a great article in the Associated Press just a few weeks ago. Reporter visited an advanced recycler in Ohio called Alterra, and I provided the degree of transparency that I think many folks were needed. So that would be an open invitation that we extend to anybody in the room, and happy to collaborate with many folks on trying to get that standardization in place that is needed.
Does anyone else from the panel want to add anything to that? I don't have.
It's working. From a plastics standpoint, when we talk about all plastics, there are solutions for a vast majority of all plastics. Will there be complete standardization? It's hard for a couple of reasons. Due to consumer behavior, the plastics in any one community is different. And the processing technologies that you need to match that up with have different requirements. So there needs to be some manipulation of that plastic stream. And maybe that gets you to 70, 80, 90% of the plastic, but it's much better than where we are today. So there needs to be evolution. This is a growing industry. It's an emerging industry. If you look at any industry, whether it's solar or wind or other renewables, electric cars, there is a very steep evolution path, and we're on that today. And people are making those commitments. And the feedstock they need comes from aggregating all plastics. If you don't get that plastic, then you're stuck with very small, discrete recycling programs, and you never make a significant change in the way we recycle plastic.
Thank you. Anybody else and have questions? Juby?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a question for ExxonMobil. I'd like you to address, since you are a primary plastic producer and you obviously already have some hazardous waste, hazardous output for your air. What are you guys doing to prevent that from entering into the environment? So maybe you can address that for us.
Yeah, well,
I think-
sorry, I need to come closer. Yeah, I'll need to take a stab at that. Well, first of all, our facilities today are highly permitted in terms of everything we do and everything we bring in and our emissions and everything. And so as we put advanced recycling capability into those existing facilities, nothing really changes. We permit those facilities. We incorporate them, include them into our emissions and everything else that we report to the authorities. And that's the way that goes. That is pretty transparent. There is, again, no hiding there. That is absolutely transparent, and we follow all the local regulations that we need to abide by. Otherwise, we have no license to operate. So again, for us, this is part of any expansion that we do, any new technology that we bring into our assets. We are strictly regulated as a chemical industry, and that is for good reasons. And so we take that very seriously and apply to those regulations as they apply to us.
Am I next?
You had a question, right?
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much indeed for the presentation. I've got two very simple questions. Can you guys provide us with what the plastic input requirement or specification is to your plants? Is very simply the first one. And secondly, Mark, I have a black box outside, and I was wondering whether you'd come and have a look at it.
It's going to be around in 3 or 4 years.
Does anyone want to address?
I can start with specification on the feedstock processing side. As Kate mentioned, there for pyrolysis processes in general, there's some plastics that are problematic. PET is problematic. It has a solid as one of its copolymers. And so most pyrolysis processes don't want that in there. Now, the good thing about that is that PET is the most mechanically recycled plastic. And there are processes being developed, Eastman, for example, who can process the more contaminated PET streams, such as carpets. The other is PVC. PVC is primarily in construction demolition waste. There's not a lot of it in the consumer waste stream. So we do manage streams to remove PET and PVC and to monitor the other elements of concern that may be in those streams. to supply certified feedstock. So we are ISCC plus certified as well, so we can track custody from the source in your municipalities all the way through processing and delivery downstream to the advanced recyclers or the mechanical.
And maybe just let me add one thing. I think for PVC, it actually is the chlorides, the halides as the molecule that are the problem, and they just happen to cause corrosion in the rest of the downstream equipment. And so that's something that is while PET has more of a yield problem, I would say PVC really has that chloride component, and that just something that we haven't cracked fully the nut on yet on what do we need to do. There are some feed preparation techniques that we are looking at, dechlorination as a potential preparation step. But again, that's actually being discussed and being worked as we start to scale up.
Can I break in 1 second? I have a question for Kate. Colorado passed a new producer responsibility legislation lately. And how will that impact plastics recycling? And as a follow-up, how does packaging design play a role in improving plastics recycling?
Thanks, Jill. So Colorado is very excited to become just the 3rd state in the country to pass a producer responsibility policy for packaging this past May. California then followed suit. Colorado has a 15% recycling rate. We are one of the worst states in the country. Sometimes we have a green reputation, and that's just not the case. When it comes to recycling, a lot of our communities lack basic curbside recycling. It's very challenging for us to transport materials. We're kind of in a manufacturing desert across the country. So producer responsibility for us is really about scaling recycling, particularly plastics recycling, and doing so without spending public dollars. This is putting the onus and the burden back on the producers, back on the packaging companies that make their products, for them to fund the recycling infrastructure. So it's a really fundamental shift around who is funding recycling and then also driving toward a better system. And the reason we think this is a good fit is because at the end of the day, recycling is about the supply chain. Companies need to get those products and packaging back to make into new products. They should be managing it like a supply chain. There's a lot of investment that's needed to drive recycling, particularly plastics, and really feel like, especially in Colorado, our local governments are not set up to make that investment. And we're really looking to drive a fundamental shift. A big part of producer responsibility is also packaging design. How do we line up the packaging design system with our recycling system? We're also members of the U.S. Plastics Pact, which is a broad stakeholder coalition looking to address plastics. This group has come out with 11 plastics that needs to be eliminated from production by 2025. The idea is that we are not going to recycle all plastics at scale, and we need to drive some changes in packaging design. So for example, they're looking at colored PET. Let's switch from a green Sprite bottle to a clear Sprite bottle. Black plastics, which are hard to separate out with our automated equipment. Let's get rid of that. Oxidogradable additives, PFAS, single-use plastics like cutlery, straws, things like that. So this is a really interesting and meaningful change to have a multi-stakeholder industry-led group in the US voluntarily commit to phase out plastics. And I think a really strong commitment to say design absolutely has to be part of this solution. Recycling is not a solution for bad design. We need to be bringing the two solutions together, designing the packaging and the recycling system so that we are working together as we move forward.
Hi, Charlie Romine, City of Madison, Wisconsin. Had picked bits and pieces of this question out of the last hour or so, but we're actually getting ready to embark on a sustainable business park. We've sold a chunk of land to Dane County, who operates the landfill, and we're going to be partnering with them in the coming years to, like I said, come up with a sustainable business park, probably shooting to open it around 2028. So we're still a few years away. Obviously, plastics, all things plastics, repurpose, reuse, advanced recycling, pyrolysis, all of that is of keen interest to us. I think for it to be a successful business campus was going to have some of those ideas included. Ideas on where we'll be able to go to get good, reliable information and avoid the black boxes that can be pretty tempting for some of our political leaders to look at and say, well, that's something we should pursue because that's going to solve all our problems. Like I said, where we can get good information, things we should look for, things that we should avoid, particularly as it relates to plastics and the conversation we've had here, because it's going to be a key piece of what we're trying to do.
Anybody on the panel want to address the business park aspect of this?
I mean, I can start, but I mean, I kind of empathize with the statements and questions, but I think, again, you know, looking at it from the city of Houston's perspective, you're talking about a recycling program that is still forming and still developing. And, you know, so the decisions that we're making today are going to be based on the streams of materials that we're seeing and what's most prevalent that's showing up in our recycling streams and our waste streams. So, I mean, we definitely know we have to start somewhere. Again, like we said, we know it's not the elixir and it's not the silver bullet that's going to solve everything, but it's certainly getting us off to the road that we need to be on as we continue to form and solidify our recycling program. So, you know, we're looking forward to, you know, some of those standards and where we can go. I think we have a pretty good resource in our backyard. So.
I'll just follow up and give a shout out to the Closed Loop report. Closed Loop Partners have been doing some great research. They're really an investor-owned group. So they're looking at these technologies, you know, what is their opportunity? What is their risk? They've done some great life cycle analysis on the different technologies. They've assessed where they are. And I think most importantly, they've put the technologies within the larger landscape of how are you collecting the materials? How are you processing the materials? What are the economics? Because, you know, the technology in and of itself is only one piece of that larger puzzle. So I feel like they're a good, you know, pretty balanced perspective on where these technologies could fit.
Okay, unfortunately, we're out of time. I knew this was going to be a really good topic, but unfortunately, we're out of time. Let's give a warm round of applause to our panelists. For those of you who are attending here in person and you have questions, hopefully you'll have a chance to chat with our panelists at some point or drop them a note through the app, the mobile app. Paulo, do you want to talk about the mobile app? Because this is kind of a new thing for us. Oh, let's just say you can go see Paulo if you're having issues with the mobile app, which I did. I had issues and he helped me. So don't be embarrassed.
Are you putting Paulo on the spot?
I am.
Hey, come give me a dissertation.
He will help you. He just raised his hand. He will help you with the mobile app. And thank you again